Good afternoon, everyone. I am very excited to bring you this video about a resource I was just made aware of today, Education Consumers Foundation. I'm showing you their Twitter feed, but I'm going to go backwards and show you their account. See, Education Consumers Foundation, they say they are like Consumer Reports, but for parents, policymakers, and other users of education. Consumer-friendly data, research, and policy analysis, and they have a website. Go check it out. Let's see. Let's click on that. And I will take you to the website so you can see what they've got. Check it. This is awesome. We show parents, taxpayers, and officials how to identify good schools and get the best from the rest. Was this a good school choice? Why is my child behind? Should my child be reading? Is the problem my child or the school? Let us show you what to look for and why. And if you click on that, they take you through how they do. If your child is struggling, the problem may be the school, not your child. I'm so glad this exists. I wish I'd known it existed a long time ago. I would have told you about it sooner, but this is why I, am out there on social media and I'm just scouring for things. And thankfully they came to me, they tagged me. So thank you. Thank you so much, Education Consumers Foundation. So going back to the Twitter feed. All right. So this is their account. And what I'm going to do is show you some of the points they made today. And hopefully this will inspire you to go and take a look at their site, subscribe to their feed on Twitter if you are on Twitter, or tell all your friends about it. This is criminal. 320 followers. This should be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, actually. But let's take a look because I've bookmarked a whole series of tweets, and I'm going to kind of go through them one by one because they're timely and they relate to things I've talked about on this channel quite a lot. The first one says, focusing on racism when poor teaching is the problem amounts to educational malpractice. Parents should challenge their local school boards. Well, I have said how many times on this channel that for the schools to focus on, spend money on, train teachers on, etc., racism or even SEL or any of these associated critical pedagogies is absolutely educational malpractice. The 2019 results of the standardized testing in this country are shown on the nation's report card. You can go check it out for yourself and also check on their site. They've got some data there. And it is abysmal. Folks, we have roughly 70% of our students who are not reading proficiently when they graduate from 12th grade. That's inexcusable. We have below 30% who are proficient in science and civics. Okay. Math is in the low 30% range. This is inexcusable given the amount of money that we are spending on education. And people can parse that all day long and say, well, it's not going to the teachers and it's going to this and it's going to that. It's controlled by the system, is it not? Parents aren't deciding to pay administrators six-figure salaries and leave the teachers buying toilet paper on their own. But parents aren't making that decision. If it were up to parents, I'm pretty sure they would give the lion's share to the teachers and certainly to the service, to the support staff who support the teachers. And, in terms of special needs and things like that, they would give it to special needs. They wouldn't give it to administrators. And they certainly wouldn't be spending it on DEI training and SEL training and all the associated curricula that go with that. They would be saying, when our kids can read, then you can talk to them about political activism, because then maybe, and at higher ages too, maybe they'll be able to push back and, think critically about what you're teaching them. But part of the reason parents are so upset with all the critical race theory in the classroom and the SEL in the classroom and the, surveilling of students and all of these other things is that schools aren't getting the basic job done. And they want to turn the kids into activists. And so it's really difficult to believe that these two things are not part of the same agenda. That somebody somewhere intentionally wants our kids to be illiterate so they can't push back on the political activism. I know that sounds conspiratorial, but what else are we supposed to think? We know how to teach children to read. We've known for 100 years, if not longer. We've been trying this whole word stuff in 3Q for a long, long time, and it's a fail. The data shows it pretty conclusively. And yet, 75% of classrooms are still using a failed method of teaching reading. We know that this student-centered, student-led group project, progressive style of education that I talked with Miss Snuffy or Catherine Burbelsing today on my live about, we know it doesn't work. It's not effective. And those teachers who've had the temerity to try the traditional methods in their classrooms have seen the difference. The schools that do traditional methods of discipline and every other thing are better. And that's why parents are scrambling to get into them, whether they're charter or private or homeschool setting, classical schools, etc. They see the results. And yet the public schools, and even to a certain degree, some of the private schools are now jumping on board with these progressive methods, or they always were, but they just had subject matter experts who were better at conveying this information to extremely bright children who tested into the schools, so they managed to get through it unscathed. We know it doesn't work. And they're stubbornly clinging to this. And what Education Consumers Foundation is doing is saying, okay, well, there are severe negative implications of that. So it's not just educational malpractice, but guess what? Your child will be so far behind the eight ball in terms of being able to support him or herself in life that they will become a liability on everyone, themselves included. They will not be able to support themselves. They will become a liability on the system of welfare supports that will be needed to enable them to survive. And they talk about that quite a bit. So here they're saying you should challenge the school board about critical race theory. Well, we've been talking about that for a long time. You know my opinion on going straight to the school board about this. It's top down. It's in the teaching pipeline. It's at the universities. It's in the teaching ed programs. You're not going to make a lot of headway complaining to the school board. But I'm not saying don't do it. You want to keep the pressure on, certainly, and you want to make sure you have superintendents in there who are looking for those rare teachers, hopefully teachers who were certified using an alternative method. So maybe they went around the teacher education garbage, and hopefully they're superintendents with spines of steel so they can push back on anything that's even remotely optional in the way of DEI training or whatever. But again, it's top down. If your state mandates an equity program or an equity curriculum, or has an ethnic studies program or an African-American studies program or a gender studies program that is mandated from the top down, it's not going to matter. The school board can't do anything. You need to replace your governor and your state school board. And sometimes they're appointed and sometimes they're elected, but you need to get to know how that works, because in many of these states where it's really bad, it's top down. Replacing the school board is just going to get you maybe a friendly superintendent who's probably going to get drummed out by the union pretty quickly. So while I agree with them that you need to keep the pressure on, if only because it demonstrates to elected officials that parents are awake and not putting up with this, you're not going to see tangible results that way, in my personal opinion. But, by all means, keep doing it. Just know what you can do and what you can't do through that method. So let's continue. So then they have this tweet: critical race theory, as the term is used today, references policies and practices founded on the analysis of systems, institutions, and power relationships through a lens of race. Do you disagree? If you do, explain your view. I'll wait. Okay. So that's what it is. What they're challenging you to do is to agree or disagree that that's what critical race theory is. That's as the term is used. It represents policies and practices founded in this analysis of systems. It's a theory of race that then is translated into a praxis or a pedagogy that finds its way into the classroom. And if you don't think that's what it is, by all means, bring it, because that is what it is as the term is used today. So let's continue. There were some other things that people were sharing. So they had that. Here they have this. We have user-friendly third grade reading charts for all 50 states. You can find every district and school in your state. So what you will do is you will click on the link. I'm going to open it in a new tab here so you can see. And you will go and find your state. See, it's all by 2019. Well, I shouldn't say that. Summer 2021. And you will get to see these example charts that tell you what the different school districts and how they're doing. And then it tells you how to understand the chart. So for example, if I click on North Carolina, it is going to show me this chart that's, difficult to see. It's going to break it down in terms of the reading proficiency you'll see across the years, compares North Carolina to the national gold standard. And let's take a look at that while we're at it. Okay. Are states reporting the truth about student achievement? So then they're comparing, wait a minute. Sorry. This is the chart I wanted to show you. Oh, I guess it's the same. So they say a good place to start is our third grade reading charts and cost of reading failure calculator. So this is what I wanted to show you. I'm sorry. I'm just jumping around really quickly here because I don't have a lot of time and I want to make sure you guys see this stuff. All right, so reading failure is costing us our future. Here are the numbers for your school or district. You're going to want to go do this, and I will put the links down below. It tells you how to use the calculator. You'll put this stuff in there. You're going to need to find out the number of third grade students, which you can probably find out through your school district. And then it says percent at basic reading level, percent of students below basic. So you go to the results in the other one in the interpreting, and then you put it in here, and it is going to tell you what the cost is. So here it says, on average, over 2 out of 3 students who fail to reach the proficient reading level by third grade drop out or finish high school unprepared for college or the workplace. As a result, they are significantly more dependent on taxpayer-funded healthcare, public safety, and welfare than their successful peers, a fact that has profound economic, cultural, and social implications for the future of the United States. Interventions capable of altering this trajectory are often negligently delayed. And what might delay them? Oh, let me see. Could it be spending an inordinate amount of time making them racially conscious and telling them they need to have a racial identity and surveilling them as far as their SEL and their attitudes about things and asking them for their pronouns? Do you think maybe that might get in the way of them reading and thinking and even having basic confidence in themselves to succeed? Yeah, it does. So when you look at this and then compare it against what we are doing in education, which is the critical theory stuff about race and everything, I think you will understand the problem. And then we've got, okay, so this is somebody who went and pulled it up. It says 72%, the same as 2018. So they can't blame the Rona as in Corona. All right. So this is, it says proficiency rates and projected costs generated by our calculator may not be compared from state to state. Within states, however, schools and districts may be compared, especially those with similar demographics. And then here it shows the additional taxes absorbed by dropouts and unprepared graduates. This is significant, folks. This is significant, these numbers. And again, as she points out, you can't blame this on coronavirus because of the numbers, where they come from. So I wanted to bring this to you because I think it is really important for you to have a resource that you can go to check your school. If your kids are still in school and you're debating, like, what should I do? You know, I know it's easy to get distracted by the, is critical race theory in my school? Should I be concerned about racism? Should I be concerned about all this, all the critical theory stuff? Yes, you should. You should be very concerned about it. But first and foremost, you need to understand that they're not getting the basic job done. They're not teaching the kids to read properly. And what happens then? As I said, if your kids cannot read, they cannot think critically. They certainly can't communicate. They can't push back on teachers who are trying to indoctrinate them. And because they're starting so early with the indoctrination stuff, it's getting in the way of the reading. So the very skill they would need to be able to think about this stuff independently isn't being taught. They're sitting ducks. They're not going to improve. And why is that important? Well, that's why I want you to go and read this piece. I've shared it pretty extensively over the last couple of days, but this is by Daniel Buck. I talked about it today on the live, where critical race theory comes from. And how do these things go together? Well, again, he talks about this. He says, there is a fundamental change occurring in American education. You have likely heard from some that it's critical race theory, a fringe understanding of race in America, and from others that this is just a bogeyman. Neither assertion is correct. Rather, critical pedagogy, a politicized theory of education, of which CRT is but one branch, has become the prevailing theory in American colleges of education, influencing curriculum instruction and policies across the country. Let me repeat that, okay? Critical race, so it's critical pedagogy, that's all of it. CRT is but one branch, has become the prevailing theory in American colleges of education, influencing curriculum, instruction, and policies. And this is how it's connected to what the Education Consumers Foundation is doing. In place of academic skills and a worldview grounded in Enlightenment thinking, critical pedagogy teaches students political activism and a worldview of oppression. So much so that they are, in fact, teaching the reading, the math, science, civics, and history so much through this lens that skills are not only secondary, they are sometimes defined as oppression itself. Let me repeat that. The skills themselves of math, of science, objective measurements of whether you are right or wrong, facts themselves. I talked about this on the video about what we're doing here in North Carolina with pre-K special needs, where they're saying we want students to question scientific facts. They are deeming facts themselves, knowledge itself, objectivity itself, all of the Western Enlightenment values that we thought we held dear and we're passing to our children as oppression. So it's not just that they're filling up the time with the DEI and the critical race theory and critical gender theory and, intersectionality. It's not just that they're taking up the time. That's a big part of it. But it's that those theories teach them that the skills themselves are not necessarily worth knowing. Okay? So he says, while showing every shortcoming of critical pedagogy is beyond the bounds of one essay, conservatives need to understand that this problem extends far beyond a few racialized, politicized lessons in coastal schools. One English curriculum, the units of study, which thousands of schools use, bases its work on critical theories, including CRT, but also post-colonial, feminist, and other radical ideologies. The curriculum cites Kimberly Crenshaw, a founding scholar of CRT, as well as other progressive activists such as Angela Davis, communist, a Marxist scholar, and Judith Butler, a gender theorist. Effective propaganda can be as subtle as it is insidious. When it's obvious, loud, and galling, it's easy to identify and reject. When it's no more noticeable than a few mold spores, it can go on spreading until it has rotted entire institutions. We must absolutely confront the media-grabbing practices such as privilege walks, but picking such battles is akin to wiping away a few mold spots from rotting floorboards. Traditional conceptions of education trace back to the Greeks and the Romantics, and comparing these ideas to critical pedagogy can isolate exactly what this philosophy is, and perhaps more importantly, isn't. In his Republic, Plato portrays education as the process of extracting individuals from a cave of shadows into the light of reality. In Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, the goal of education is the forming of virtuous habits. In both cases, education directs us beyond ourselves, discovering the world as it is, and aligning our characters to an objective law from without. Now remember, critical pedagogy, objective law, objective fact is oppression. It's whiteness. It's bad. So do you think your child's going to learn to read properly, use grammar properly, spell, write, do math, etc., in a way that would help them be successful in life, to actually use these skills in any meaningful way, if the mindset, if the worldview is that all of this stuff is bad? These beliefs dominated European thought up until and through the Enlightenment. Medieval universities built themselves upon the liberal arts, and Loyola attempted to systematize education for the youth in his Ratio Studiorum. Then romantics such as Rousseau suggested that children follow their natural inclinations, that any ascription to outside influence is only corrupting. And John Dewey popularized this vision in the 20th century. Dewey went so far as to say that no content had inherent value in learning. Do you think that might be a little bit of a problem when you want your kid to learn civics? Or you want your child to learn science and how it actually functions? Or how about just how to read using the science of reading? No content has inherent value in learning. Rather, what interests the child ought to lead the way. What do you think a child's going to be more or less interested in a topic if the teacher says, you should be very interested in this because you are a victim, and this is how you're going to liberate yourself and tear down the horrible barriers that are preventing you and your peers and people you ought to care about, of course, if you are a good person, from succeeding? Do you think that might be of interest to them? When somebody makes you afraid or angry, do you think you're going to be more or less interested in that content than content that doesn't make you afraid or angry? Which do you think you'd be more curious about? The stuff that they tell you is urgently necessary for you to learn right now because terrible things will happen if you don't, or the stuff that just might help you, develop as a person and create lifelong learning habits and virtue that, is harder to see or quantify today, where there isn't an adult in the room going, do this and you're virtuous. You see, you can cultivate interest in students if you make them feel strongly enough about them. By the way, adult students too. Both Greek and Romantic theories manifest today in classical and project-based learning, respectively. We can debate the relative efficacy. I don't really want to debate the efficacy of project-based learning. It is crap. I will go out on a limb and say it's crap. It's absolute crap. Just going to leave it there. Let's see. But in both cases, the focus remains primarily on academics and moral formation. If traditional education asks us to step into our backyard to explore the world, and romantic education asks us to explore what's inside. How do you feel about January 6th? How do you feel about 1619? How do you feel about American history? How do you feel about this? That is the hallmark of critical pedagogy, right? It asks you to go inside. So critical pedagogy would have us burn down the house and trench the garden. How do you feel about these things? Especially if I tell you that all of these things that you're looking at are rooted in white supremacy and oppression. You're going to have a pretty negative feeling about it, aren't you? Especially if you're a kid and you can't really question that. Paulo Freire's book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is often considered the seminal work of critical pedagogy. It has sold millions of copies since its publication, a rare feat for a niche book on education. Academic journals dedicate entire issues to it, and university libraries host special events for it. It's canon. It is canon in schools of ed. Yes, even I was made to read it in 1989. I'm so not loving all these mask ads. Anyway, ironically, while a tract on education, the book provides little practical insight on instruction. So parents, if the teachers are reading that book in their teacher education programs, they're not learning instructional design. They're not learning how to impart information. They're not learning actually how to teach. They're learning how to feel and how to think about teaching. They're learning how to think about their students as oppressed, how to think about the world as an oppressive place. Freire encourages educators to travel from town to town, observe local needs, and encourage workers into action. He cites the mass murderer Che Guevara as an example of a loving teacher, and the Maoist Cultural Revolution, with a death toll in the millions, as his thought process when systematized. Is that what you want your children learning? Do you think that's going to improve the scores and, make for a good school? Well, those things are canon in education and teacher education. So think of that. When you're looking at the school numbers, you should also be wondering, I wonder how many of the teachers went through a traditional, teacher education program where they had to read this garbage, because that might give you some clue as to why your kid can't read. What's more, Freire mapped the oppressor-oppressed dichotomy of Marx onto the student-teacher relationship. Now you know why there's so much student-led learning and project-based learning and group activities where the teacher just kind of like mills around the room and looks over their shoulders. Well, what do you think? And what do you want to do? And what do you want to learn? And so forth. And I'm exaggerating for effect, but I hope you understand that this is not too far off in a lot of America's classrooms. That the teacher teaches and the student is taught is characteristic of the ideology of oppression, he argues. Now go watch the live I did today with Catherine Brubblesing, and I want you to listen to her talk about Michaela, her school in London, and the results that they have. I want you to compare what she says about what is compassionate and what is loving and what is effective with what the critical theorists are saying. No, it's oppressive for the teacher to teach. It's oppressive. They're co-equal actors. Go listen to what she has to say, and then you decide. Parents, you decide if you think that your child is a co-equal actor with the teacher in the room. From this foundation, multiple subsidiary branches grow. While its proponents will defend CRT as only teaching accurate racial history or using race as a lens to better understand society, the issue is that CRT is not just this. Rather, CRT uses race in American history as a lens through which to condemn Western values such as objectivity and constitutional law. And each branch of critical pedagogy proceeds accordingly, using race, gender, class, or any other identity signifiers as a means to interrogate and condemn our country's commitment to classically liberal values. Okay, so you need to read this whole piece. I just wanted to go through that bit of it so you understand, because as he gets down to the end, but please do read all of it, okay? Today's progressive theorists only train students how to deconstruct the beautiful and true, not how to appreciate it, in place of teacher guiding students through the best which has been thought and said, arming them with the knowledge and skills they need to affect change in this world. Real change. They would have students discussing whatever progressive controversy or idea is in vogue. I'll give our students Shakespeare and mathematical equations over placards and bullhorns any day. And the main reason this is so important, folks, is that when you teach children to deconstruct and destruct all of these things because they're oppressive, but you don't give them any skills or knowledge along the way. Like, even if you believed these premises, that we live in this horribly oppressive world that's full of racism and intolerance, and we need to just tear down these institutions to rebuild them, don't you think it would be a good idea for the people tasked with rebuilding them to have half a clue how to build anything? How are you going to build? What you going to build? How are you going to rebuild civilization into this wonderfully free and liberated utopia that you imagine isn't on the other side of this destruction or deconstruction if you can't read or do math? And as I said, you can go to this website, Education Consumers Foundation, and you can make it your homework assignment to learn more about how little your children are learning. And now you can combine the two and understand why they work together. Okay. How did we get here? Well, because as I said, I, as a student teacher in a master's program at an Ivy League institution, was given Paulo Freire in 1989. Okay. And I just explained to you what the priority is. It has been going on a very long time. So what you're looking at is not just a matter of, oh, there's not enough money and there's not this and the problem and the parents aren't involved, blah, 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 blah. No, we have poured billions, trillions, multiples of trillions of dollars since I was just in graduate school. And this started before then, by the way, but into public education, into education in general in America. This is all education. It's not just public, okay? But we have poured trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars into it, and the results just get either worse, markedly worse, or flat. They are flat. They are stagnant. We're seeing no progress, and we are absolutely dismal compared to other nations of our caliber. We are not competitive. Our children are not competitive, and it is costing us not just the money we're spending on these failing schools, but it is costing the money that they are pouring into college educations that aren't going to help them because many of them drop out. Huge percentage drop out, even if they go in the first place. And with 80% of our kids graduating high school, while only about 33 or so percent can read proficiently, what does that tell you? We are socially promoting people to get them out of high school, and then they wonder why they can't succeed. And is it any wonder then that they will turn around and blame capitalism or blame, racism or blame some other thing? First of all, that's what they've been taught is the reason. And secondly, they aren't even familiar with what skills they don't have because they weren't introduced to them. Not really. But they were certainly introduced to all this political science and all of these easy answers as to why, when they got out of high school without the requisite knowledge to succeed, they're not succeeding. So thank you for watching. Please share this video. Please like this video. Please comment, subscribe, click the bell to be notified when I make a new video, and consider supporting my channel in one of the ways listed below. Also joining my locals community at thereasonwelearn.locals.com. Thank you for watching. Have a great evening.